Hi, y'all. Keri Stephens here from the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm excited to share with you some work about communication. Specifically, I'm going to talk about how we're engineering the communication layer of flood infrastructure and moving people to action. We've done a lot of things in the state of Texas, and we've developed a lot of flood tools and flood models. But when we try to share that with our audiences, a lot of times our audiences can't understand, and they don't even understand why they should care about all the data and sophisticated models that we've developed. So, bridging this gap between the great technical products we've developed and helping the public understand the value in this is a lot of what my team has been doing for the last decade. Now, why does this happen? Well, I think we can think about people. And first of all, people need to trust the information before they act. Doesn't necessarily matter if it's the best, most accurate information out there. Trust is really important. Another thing is people will ignore information that's too technical or if they don't feel like it's relevant for them. They also can be very influenced by those people they trust, regardless of whether they're experts or not. And that means that people don't always make rational decisions. Our emotions really come to bear in a lot of these difficult type decisions. And then finally, all of these have real implications for our natural and our built environment. So let's take a look at kind of what communication is and what outreach is, because a lot of times we need to do more than just outreach. Actually, real communication means we've got to pull our audiences on our team early in the process. So today I'm going to be talking about three main things. Some of the flood tools that my teams have been working on to improve communication, the recent published and ongoing research that we're doing, and then finally, share a few of the ideas and opportunities that I think we have to really engage our audiences in meaningful ways and make a difference. So let's first of all focus on these flood tools. And I'm going to talk about a lot in a short period of time because you can use the QR code that you're going to see throughout this presentation to learn more about any of these projects. We've developed guidelines for the state of Texas, specifically the Texas Integrated Flooding Framework, which is available online now. My teams worked on the communicating and visualizing flood risk portion of this document. We worked with our broader team in the state of Texas to redefine who we were focusing on. A lot of times people talk about end users, but we said no, we actually need to shift that language and call them users or target users. And the reason is end users just kind of rhetorically make it sound like you only involve them at the very end of the project. And what we've done is in the guidelines, you involve them from the very beginning. So let me kind of show you the high level of what those guidelines look like. There is a pyramid in terms of how we develop models, data sets, and tools. And we need to move beyond making them functional and usable into what we call the experience levels. So we need to make them interactive, accessible, and meaningful for our audiences. Along the way, we need to think about who our target audience is, involve the entire stakeholder community around them, think about how to adopt practices that are high fidelity communication, meaning clarity, targeted appropriately to these audiences, grounded in science, but delivered in digestible chunks. And then our goal is to actually motivate behavior change. We've done some extended work in the lower Rio Grande Valley as part of this project, and we've learned that maps, certain aspects work, but other aspects on maps are very confusing for a lot of people, and not just the general population. They can be confusing for the official organizations who are having to use those maps to then explain flood risk to others. We've also learned a lot about illegal dumping and how it contributes to flood risk in Texas. And as I've given this talk around the state, many people say illegal dumping is contributing to their flood problems as well. Another project my teams are working on right now is called the Flood Analytics Project, funded by the Water Development Board. We're using those TIF guidelines to be sure that we get that target user input all the way from the very beginning of the project. We're interviewing and surveying 10 different user groups, and we're developing user stories that we call use trains that chain out the decisions people are making. And those will be completed in 2026. Another project with the Institute for Disaster Resilient Texas is we're developing a toolkit for floodplain managers. Specifically, in this project, we're looking at ways to help them be able to better explain 100-year floodplain. And I know it may sound radical, but we're trying to not use numbers to do it. An alternative way is to talk about a 1% chance per year, but our way is to actually look at creating some narratives and then systematically test these to see how people are responding to them. The other thing we'll be doing is developing future plans around explaining elevation, and we'll include some of our sandbag work that we've done, as well as leveraging the existing templates that my teams have developed for the Texas Water Development Board. And let me show you a couple of those examples. First of all, the sandbag instructions. You know, when we were working in the lower Rio Grande Valley in one of our projects, we identified that homes and businesses can often use sandbags for drainage related flooding. However, they don't use the sandbags properly and water still gets in their homes and businesses. So what we did is we developed a narrative story-based format, and in working with the local fire department, created an instruction guide essentially in this format. It's a tri-fold brochure. We use Spanish first and also English language on the brochure. And when we implement this properly, it can make a really big difference in protecting our built environment. Another project that our team worked on has been trying to figure out how to deal with the fact that most people who die from floodwaters die driving in the floodwaters. And we especially have this younger demographic that they feel invincible. And so our road safety infrastructure doesn't always convince them to turn around and not drown. That group in particular, you know, whenever I would tell them in focus groups, show them turn around, don't drown, their immediate reaction was, well, I'm not going to die. God, I've got a big truck. And so I iterated over the next several days and worked with a bunch of different focus groups to figure out that these young adults, they don't own homes yet, but their most prized possession, you guessed it, it's that truck or that car. So the message that our team came up with is keep your car high and dry. And El Paso is actually going to be launching a version of this campaign in monsoon season in 2026. So we're already starting to make an impact with thinking about approaching different audiences with slightly different messages. In a project my team worked in the upper Rio Grande Valley, a desert area, you know, a lot of people think desert and they're like, deserts don't flood, they need water. Well, people who understand the way that the flow of water works knows that as little as 2 inches of water can actually cause a desert to flood. And this particular area was FEMA flood mapped in 1985. They just don't have much data available. So this was a colonia that is an unincorporated area, and around 1,000 people live there. So it's pretty substantial in size. However, when I worked with this community, they were consistently showing me that they had taken pictures, and almost every single year, someone in their community experiences flooding into their homes. So what my team did, working with the Institute for Disaster Resilient Texas and the DRIP program, is created a photo dashboard for them. We hired trusted community members who went door to door, and over 90% of the community participated. They shared their photos, and now what's happening is the local county officials can go to funding sources and show them, I know it doesn't look like we have a flooding problem, but look at all this photographic evidence. And they're already having success getting funding for their mitigation projects. Let's move now, and I'm going to share with you a couple of recently published articles as well as some ongoing research. The Texas Integrated Flooding Framework research that I talked about a while ago is actually going to be published this year, and I'm waiting right now. It should come out in May of 2026 for this 496 page, 1.7 pound first ever handbook of infrastructure communication. I co edited it with my civil engineering colleagues, Casey Faust, and we really think that it'll go a long way to talking about how people, infrastructure, and flooding is a component of this, really have to work together to solve these major, major problems. Another study that was published in 2026 has to do with our safety messages. My team was curious, if people have seen turn around, don't drown and low water crossing signs, are they more likely to turn around? Well, the good news is we found they are. It's a small effect size, however, it's still having a positive impact. However, in the process of that, we also uncovered people may not understand these signs. And let me show you a concrete example of that. We may be sending conflicting messages, specifically with low water crossing sign. I want you to think about what that means. People in the flood space know exactly what this means. However, when you ask a general population, around a third of the people say, oh, it means the area is safe because only a low amount of water gets on the road, right? No, that's not at all what this is trying to convey. It's a yellow sign. It's trying to say caution. It's a low area and water can cross the road and it can be dangerous. Now, where this really gets complicated is we're starting to see some communities implement what they're calling a high water alert system. Now, y'all, I have a question here. Low water crossing signs with high water alert signs. What are people supposed to act on? Low water or high water? So I think we can really impact flood and safety policy by trying to save lives with some new signage. And I'm already talking with TxDOT as well as National Weather Service and NOAA, and several rural communities and local communities throughout the state of Texas are already starting to implement some of these changes. But the rural gap is really real, and I would say it's coming out loudly and clearly in all the research that I do. So let's take a look at one of my team's funded, National Science Foundation funded projects around the 2025 Central Texas floods. You may be aware was a devastating flood where a lot of people lost lives. And our study is focused on uncovering what worked. Now, of course, we're also learning some of the challenges along the way, but we're also looking for the good things that have happened. It's a very interdisciplinary project. We combine the messages that people have received along with an understanding of the building structures and built environment and the natural systems like the rivers, and incorporating all of that into how humans are making decisions. We're teaming with Texas Advanced Computing Center, and we've done over 25 interviews so far with 300 plus pages of documents that we're analyzing. So here's a few of the early findings. First of all, there are many issues with alerts and warnings. I was traveling in the area and was without cell service on SOS, as a matter of fact, for over 8 hours one day. There's also issues around timing. When things like this happen at night and they happen really rapidly, real challenge to try to warn people. And then people are not necessarily planning and really being aware ahead of these disasters. One example I'll share with you that really heightened my awareness that we have work to do in this space is people take their hearing aids out at night. That means they're not going to hear the alerts on their cell phone unless they've done something to activate like a vibration kind of motion. And sirens, if we're going to implement sirens, not sure people who have taken their hearing aids will ever hear those sirens. Not to mention the fact that sirens are meant to be outdoor warning systems. So let's take a look specifically at some of the challenges with that. I do think sirens can be good. And if you take a look in Flash Flood Alley, this is kind of the area in Texas that experiences flash flooding. But it's also an area in Texas that has higher probabilities for tornadoes. Well, I grew up in a part of Texas where we did have tornado sirens that went off. And so we were either running underground to get in our storm shelter or running in and jumping in our bathtub and throwing a mattress over our heads. That is not what we want people doing when they hear a flood siren. And now that we have flood warning systems, sirens being a part of that, that are going in to a lot of parts of Texas, we really need to think long and hard about what actions do we want people to take when they hear a siren? And will they even know what that siren is for? This is an area where there's not much research right now, and it's a conversation I really want us to have in the state to be sure that we're able to come up with good solutions to help people make the best decisions possible. Finally, super important, sirens are one layer in our communication warning systems. They will not solve all the problems alone, and we have to involve humans in the system. Continuing with some of these early findings, we're also finding that if people trust someone and that person calls them and says, "Hey, have you looked at the weather alerts? Are you at risk?" It increases the likelihood that they're going to pay attention. We're calling this the go tell strategy. Go tell someone that you love, someone that you trust, what's happening, and ask them to be sure that they're safe. Very worried about our visitors and our newcomers in areas because local knowledge seems to be really important to help people make good decisions. And then finally, in the evacuation planning and emergency action plan space, we're finding some organizations that are doing a lot right. They have emergency action plans, they run drills on site. That's not universal. There are some places that do not, but I think it's important to remember there's a lot of good work that is being done around pre-planning and drilling. Let me now move on to some of the kind of opportunities and ideas that I think could make our work in Texas even more meaningful. And I'll just give you an example. One of the reasons that I really appreciate National Science Foundation funding is that it requires us to do outreach and to make sure that we are incorporating the community into the research outcomes that we find. For example, in one community, we were able to purchase faucet covers. And then we taught the kids how to put them on their faucets, wrap their pipes, and so they can actually be very active in helping to protect the water infrastructure in their communities. We're also increasingly concerned about the growing population in the US of older adults. One of the key things that we've got to do there is reduce the overload needed to help them get prepared. So I tested some of the FEMA materials that came out around 2023, 2024. And when I showed them the materials, people were just overwhelmed with how much content was there. And they would say to me, just tell me the top priorities. And of course, we all realize that the top priorities vary between different people. So, one of the strategies I want my teams to do is we're starting to think through how do we help people manage the overload of getting prepared. It's actually hard. And how do we encourage them to talk to others? So, building on a message that my team created with funds from the Water Development Board, take 5 minutes today, prep 5 items, come back tomorrow, take 5 more minutes, and prep 5 more items. This idea of chunking preparedness to make it digestible and easy for all different groups to do. I'm working with the Institute for Disaster Resilient Texas in DRIP 2.0, where we're going to be working with more rural communities and helping them find access to data and resources that can help make them more resilient. And the last example I want to share is in a different space. It's not flood, but it's fire. And I think a lot of what was done with this community is inspirational and something I hope that we can implement in our flood prone communities as well. So let me tell you about it. It's a wildfire evacuation drill that took 14 months to plan. Very community driven. I was fortunate enough for my graduate students and undergraduate students to actually get involved with this group. And it was very much a collaborative planning effort. Now, kind of ironically, the first attempt to run this was canceled by floods, but we regrouped, and one of the key things was that the community members went door to door to pass out preparedness bags. Ready, set, go bags is what they're called in the fire community, and to tell people about this drill, which was an opportunity for them to actually get in and participate. And we got to include the students in the process. So the day of the drill, over 100 different community members got in their cars, packed their pets in their carriers, packed their go bags, and practiced evacuating. There were 20 emergency responders who were there. We had local county officials. The students conducted a research project. And I would say one of the most inspirational things about this project is that every year the community gets back together and holds a summer ice cream social to celebrate the fact that they pulled this off. It also serves as a great way to teach the newcomers in the community that this is a prepared community and that they have the power for them to be resilient and to actually practice and drill alongside the emergency responders. Why don't we do this for flooding, y'all? I think there's an incredible opportunity here. So today, what I've done is I've shared with you some of the flood tools that are out there that are being used to try to improve communication, some of the research updates that are very relevant to Texas, and then shared with you a few of these opportunities and ideas for how we can actually involve our communities and make a real difference in the flood work we're doing in Texas. You know, people often say to me, Keri, how do you know this about people? I'm an academic researcher, okay? But I'm a different kind of academic researcher. You know, I don't sit behind my computer all the time. I actually go out in the field and I talk with people. I want to have those out of the box conversations. I want people to show me where their problem areas are because I believe that if we actually know what's happening on the ground, we then know how to do the sophisticated modeling. We're using AI, we're using digital twins, all of the sophisticated technologies. Pull all that together and understand how humans make decisions, and we can make a real difference. Y'all, I have a vision for the future where we can make flood communication research understandable and actionable. Following on one of the recommendations from the TIFF project, I hope we can create a message development studio. And the idea behind this is let's figure out which specific messages work for which audiences and what kind of decisions that we want those audiences to make. Finally, we've got to collaborate if we're really going to make a difference. I want to thank, and this is literally just a fraction of the collaborators that have been a part of all the projects that I've shared with you today. They've been wonderful. We've worked with different institutions, a lot of different universities, a lot of graduate students, and then a lot of different disciplines at our different universities and a lot of state agencies. I'll end by just saying thank you so much for your time. The QR code is there. Feel free to take a look if any of this research is interesting to you or if you want to learn more. I encourage us all to think about how are we going to make a difference moving forward. You know, I'm really excited about the possibilities because I think the time is right for us to really do something about this in Texas. Thank you so much.